we were teaching that Jesus is going to come in a second coming. He is going to come soon. And we're preparing for that second coming of Jesus. And we were teaching that we should not look up into the clouds of the sky for Jesus to come, because he is not going to come that way. We were followers of the other Jesus. We were completely deceived. We were actually working for the Antichrist.
Yes, thank you for joining us today on Light Channel in Denmark. Today we have a very special guest, an author, Will Barron, who is going to share not only his experience in the New Age movement, but also how the New Age movement is it's actually infiltrating Christianity today and the agenda behind the New Age movement. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight here in Denmark from, I don't know if it's sunny California, in Los Angeles.
Well, it normally is sunny here, but unfortunately right now we've got a thunderstorm moved in, and there's heavy rain and there's some lightning. So if you hear some lightning, please be aware that we're doing the best we can. I hope the lights don't go out. You know, in a thunderstorm like this, sometimes the lights go out. I have backup power on the computer, but not on the lighting, so we'll see. We may be in the dark.
Yeah. Well, we'll pray that the power won't go off, and I was actually able to hear the thunderstorm during our video intro. But, well, in our first program tonight, I would like to start by sharing your personal testimony. Maybe some of our viewers do not have any experience or knowledge at all about New Age. Maybe some people might think that New Age religions belong to some Eastern religion and has nothing to do with us or with Christians. And well, could you start by explaining for me, for our viewers, if you would, however you wish, could you please tell us, and that's my first question to you, what is actually exactly the New Age movement? Is it just another religion, or is it a mixture of several religions?
Well, let me start out by saying the New Age movement visibly as an identity under the word New Age is disappearing. The New Age movement is a satanic deception. It is a major initiative launched by Satan and his evil angels, pretty much started around 1985 when a Russian mystic called Madame Blavatsky started the Theosophical Society in New York City. And from that founding, the New Age has been gathering steam and it has been increasing. In the 1960s and 70s, especially through the influence of rock stars like John Lennon, New Age, in its Hindu aspects, got a major boost where there was this promotion of transcendental meditation. The Theosophical Society that Blavatsky founded was also developing and had many, many offshoots. And so in the 60s and 70s, you had the rock opera Hair. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. The word New Age was very much up front and it became quite popular. But since authors like myself and many other authors are exposing the New Age to be a satanic deception, Satan and his evil angels are now morphing the New Age into something mainstream. In fact, they're no longer even using the word New Age. It has been migrated over to simply spirituality and spiritual. But the same movement is there. Theosophy still exists and its offshoots, but you now have visibly mainstreaming of New Age. New Age is basically when you go to fitness centers and they're
Mm.
giving yoga classes,
Mm-hmm.
or in a regular Christian church, they are now practicing so called Christian meditation, or you go to holistic health practitioners, and you could be exposed to new age style healing techniques, but you're never going to see the word
Mm-hmm.
new age affiliated with it. Things like acupressure, acupuncture, rolfing, reiki, kinesiology. There's a lot of stuff out there now that is not branded new age, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that from the religious aspects, New Age is the neo spiritualism.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 1840s, you had the Fox sisters in New York State started the spiritualism movement with rappings and with seances and channeling supposedly the spirits of
Mm-hmm.
deceased relatives.
Mm.
That was very popular in the late 19th century and in the first half of the 20th century, but that is not that
Mm.
popular now.
Mm.
Instead, the new spiritualism is this idea that you practice transcendental meditation and you connect with the God that is within you.
Mm-hmm.
That is really the essence of New Age, is basically Eastern transcendental meditation. And the main theology of the New Age is that all religions are from God. So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if you are a Hindu or a Buddhist or a follower of the Zoroastrian religion, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Sikh,
Mm.
all religions are initiatives of God. And another major teaching of the New Age movement is that Satan does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So any spiritual manifestation has to be from God. If Satan
Mm.
doesn't exist and there's something miraculous, something spiritual happens, you are practicing meditation and you have a mystical experience, according to New Age, it has to be from God. There's nowhere
Mm.
else it can come from. So, yes, New Age is a religious movement. There's no headquarters for it. It is a multi religion movement that is designed to bring about the one world religion. This is the idea
Mm-hmm.
that we must set aside our differences, we must focus on what we have in common, and we must all join together and merge together and bring about this society of peace, of prosperity, of harmony. And
Mm.
in reality, the New Age movement technically is preparing the world to accept the Antichrist as being
Mm-hmm.
the second coming of Jesus. This is where it's all going. It's
All
going to
right.
be an Antichrist is going to come, take control of the world, and all the New Agers, even though they may not identify as New Agers,
Mm.
they're all going to say, yes, this
Mm-hmm.
is Christ because I have been his servant for years. He appeared to me in meditation. I've had dreams and visions of him.
Mm.
And so they're all going to recognize him and say, this is the second coming of Jesus. It is
Yeah.
basically, New Age is a preparation for the coming of the Antichrist.
All right. Well, that was a very short introduction to a very complex movement, and I'm sure some people would say, well, that sounds pretty much like a conspiracy. But let me point one aspect for our viewers before we go on. Because the thing is that you are not just someone interested in New Age and practice some weird practices. You are actually a New Age priest. Is that correct? And briefly, how does a New Age priest differ compared to a Christian minister, for example?
Well, let me tell you, I didn't look any different as
Mm.
a priest in the New Age than I look now. Much of my lifestyle was similar to my lifestyle now. I was very dedicated to my religious beliefs at the time, dedicated to my cause. I took vows of celibacy
Mm-hmm.
as part of that priesthood, although I personally had no doubt that I was actually joining the Hindu priesthood. That was what I believed I was joining, and the Hindu priesthood is a celibate priesthood. When I moved to Los Angeles in 1979 for 2 years, I lived a party lifestyle. I lived in Hollywood, part of the Hollywood party scene, used to go to bars and rock concerts and used to do a lot of dating and all the things people of the world do. And when I started getting involved deeply in the New Age, all that stopped. I stopped drinking. I was not drinking any alcohol, not involved in any kind of drug taking. In many ways, the life of a New Age priest is very similar to a priest within Christianity. A major difference is, who is your master? Now, I believed that my master was Jesus Christ, but it was a deception. And there were certain aspects of my life, some addictions that I was never able to have control over as a New Age priest, which the real Jesus Christ has given me victory over. Jesus said that beware of the wolves because they appear in sheep's clothing. So if you to just visibly see a New Age priest, they're going to look like a regular Christian pastor. It's only when you more deeply probe into their belief system that you will have a difference.
Well, it sounds like New Age experience had a positive impact on you. So I'm kind of confused here because, as I understand, were you raised in a Christian home?
I was raised in a very conservative Christian home, and let me acknowledge that the first 4 years of deep involvement in the New Age, this is after taking the vow of celibacy, it was a fascinating experience. I had a personal spirit guide that claimed to be the ascended master Djwal Khul. This is one of the ascended masters of the Theosophical Society. They claim there are 49 main agents of God living on planet Earth that are guiding the evolution of the planet, both spiritually and politically. And for the first 4 years, it was a very positive experience, a very exciting experience. But then there slowly developed what I call the New Age nightmare, where you reach a point of no return, where the demonic spirits are actually have possessed you and they control you. And it is then an absolute nightmare of slavery to demonic spirits. And yes, I started out in a conservative Christian family, but I had just a mental assent belief in Jesus. I think the biggest problem with Christianity is that, especially in English-speaking countries where you have a tradition of the King James Version of the Bible, the Great Commission is to go ye therefore and teach all nations. It is not a good rendition of the Greek. The proper Greek is to make disciples of all nations. So I was not a disciple of Jesus. I was a church member. And yes, I believed in Jesus. I believed that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. And I believed that through belief in him being the Messiah, I was saved. The reality was, though, true Christianity is to become a disciple of Jesus, where he is the Lord and Master of your life. And he certainly wasn't when I was born and brought up in a Christian family.
Well, in your view, how is that possible, even for someone like you that was raised in a conservative Christian home, to be attracted and get into these New Age practices then?
It's very easy. Take, for example, Eve in the Garden of Eden. Eve was created perfectly, yet succumbed to deception, primarily through ignorance and foolishness. And this is the human nature. And I was deceived. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a very gradual process. I think when I was 15 years old and went to a movie theater and saw a satanic movie. It was titled The Devil Rides Out. I think that implanted in me a seed of fascination for the occult. And in high school, we had a teacher in general studies. Actually, this was junior college. A teacher in general studies used to often talk about Sigmund Freud and his ideas, and I was fascinated. As a student, I had a lot of stress, a lot of phobias and fears in my life and anxiety, and I was fascinated by the idea that Sigmund Freud was this great psychoanalyst that could solve your problems through this therapy. So I started reading books written by Sigmund Freud and started experimenting with dream therapy. Later, I acquired a book titled Stress Disease. I borrowed from the local city library, and that was written by a New Ager, and it was a self-help book for stress. I thought it was fascinating, but towards the end of the book, it was presenting some mystical healing ideas that I was fascinated by and decided to research those ideas further. I joined an organization based in London called Health for the New Age, promoting holistic health and mystical healing. Other people could perhaps buy books by Deepak Chopra, one here titled Boundless Energy that I have. There's many ways people, through psychology or through holistic health, can be gradually drawn deeper and deeper into New Age. The deception deepens. For me, there was a crisis in 1980 in my life, personal crisis, and I felt I needed counsel. I had been involved in psychology counseling and felt there wasn't enough power in it, and I decided to go and visit a New Age psychic. I didn't even know what the word New Age meant at the time. And I had a psychic reading with this professional psychic. She was the director and founder of a New Age center called the Lighted Way. You know, notice how New Age uses the expression lighted way as it was called. And she had incredible psychic ability. There's no question this lady was connected with some kind of higher consciousness. She could tell me things about myself that no one would ever know. So demonic spirits were actually communicating this information to her. She was a channeler. She was involved in theosophy. She was a major leader within the offshoots of theosophy in Los Angeles. And this psychic called Muriel Isis intrigued me. And she's claimed to have a whole body of knowledge that could help you to be successful in life. And this was what was constantly eluding me. How can I be successful? How can I be happy? And so I was intrigued, and she invited me to start attending her evening and classes and weekend workshops. And I then got deeper and deeper into the New Age, practicing transcendental meditation. And then in 1981, it was October 31st, right on Halloween, after taking the day before a vow of celibacy, the personal ascended master appeared to me in an incredible visionary experience. And of course, this was very exciting. I felt that I was honored to be offered to be a relationship of being a disciple of an ascended master. That was a great honor. But then, of course, about 2 years later, it turned into a nightmare.
Wow. Well, you already mentioned books, you mentioned movies, and you mentioned that you went to these psychics that you believed had power and were able to help you. And these are some of the topics that we're going to touch at the end of this program tonight. Not that much tonight, but we're gonna especially go into this tomorrow at the same time. So already now we would like to invite our viewers to follow with us here tomorrow night. We're going to do God's will, live stream again with you, Will, and we're gonna exactly touch on these books and some of these movies. But let's go back to your testimony. Well, I suppose when you've started with these books, when you've started with these movies and going to these psychics, you were not aware of the dangers and the occult atmosphere connected to New Age at that point in life, in your life?
That is correct. I must admit, though, when I first started attending those evening classes where we were training how to practice Eastern mystical meditation, transcendental meditation, as it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Now they just call it mindfulness meditation within education and psychology programs.
Oh.
As we were sitting in this circle called the light circle, it felt eerie to me. It kind of felt weird. It felt like there was darkness there. But the mystical power that I'd
Oh.
experienced, for example, when I had that psychic reading with this center's founder director, there was balls of liquid perspiration rolling down my head through this 1.5 hour psychic counseling session. And yet the air conditioning was working perfectly. I didn't feel nervous. It was not hot in the room. It was nice and cool. And yet balls of liquid perspiration are rolling down my face. And I had to keep taking Kleenex tissues to wipe my forehead. And I knew there was incredible power there. And as I was practicing meditation in this light circle, there would be like an electric light bulb would switch on inside my head, and this light would seem to flow through my body, and it felt very peaceful. So with these mystical experiences happening, even though I thought the whole thing was sort of dark and weird, I was intrigued by it. And eventually, after maybe 4 or 5 classes there, this sense of a darkness in the place disappeared altogether. And I felt that this was home.
Hmm. Wow.
And I was not aware. That's true. Mind you, I ceased attending a Christian church when I was probably about 24 years old, 24 or 25.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I'm part of this light circle, 6, 7 years had passed, and I had basically forgotten all the Christian things I had learned while attending church. I had never been a student of the Bible. I never used to read the Bible. Um, that was a major issue, that I was quite ignorant. I mean, I knew what pastors were preaching, but I was very ignorant. And yes, I was not in any way aware that I was in any real danger at all. This was, to me, an exciting new path. It offered what seemed to me a better lifestyle than living the regular secular Hollywood party lifestyle.
Well, you already mentioned that one of the problems that actually, I believe, attracted you into New Age was your lack of Bible knowledge. This is what you just mentioned, right? That's
Absolutely, yeah. Very little knowledge of the Bible. I mean, I knew the basics of Christianity. I knew the basics of the teachings of the church, but Bible knowledge, no, not at all.
All right. So actually, when you think back, what was so fascinating about the New Age, and what attracted you to this movement?
Well, again, my entry was more not I wouldn't say it was an attraction per se. I would say it was a gradual progression of interest and fascination. Uh, Started through psychology, the promises of healing, promises of being relieved of stress, being able to feel relaxed, being able to feel at ease, being able to feel happy. And I think a major attraction of New Age itself was that it offered purpose in life beyond the daily grind. You were part of a movement that was trying to improve the conditions on planet Earth. You believed that you were a person that was a disciple of an ascended master who was one of God's main representatives on planet Earth. And so I felt that as a disciple of the ascended master, that we were bringing in this new age of peace and prosperity, and that it was something very good and very positive.
All right. Well,
And then, of
again,
course, you have
yeah.
these mystical experiences that confirmed that you were on a path of what
Mm-hmm.
you believe was God. You have,
Mm.
I mean, there were many, in my book, I described many
Mm-hmm.
incredible experiences that I had that
Mm-hmm.
always seemed to confirm that I was on the path of God.
Yeah, yeah. So you already mentioned, so it was the experience, the feelings were there, you saw light, you had conversation with these, which you today you believe are demons, and all of this started, so just to recapitulate a little bit, by lack of knowledge of Bible, you started to watch a lot of movies, and I'm thinking now that a lot of people, and it's not just Christians, I'm thinking also of Muslims, and probably a lot of people will say there is no harm whatsoever in watching almost any kind of movie. I mean, there are loads of Christians, as you well know, who watch occult themed movies, thinking that they're watching something that is essentially harmless because it's not real. So, again, did movies, books, computer games, whatever, play any role in your conversion to New Age?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I originally was fascinated by the occult. This is before I even had the psychic reading. This is while I still lived in the United Kingdom. I lived near the city of Manchester. And I came across, through a psychologist, these Carlos Castaneda books.
Mm-hmm.
This one is titled The Power of
Silence.
Silence. Carlos Castaneda is an occult fiction writer, but he actually writes his books as if they are non-fiction. He claims in his books to be an apprentice with shamans that live in northern Mexico in the state
Mm-hmm.
of Sonora. These shamans are known as brujos or brujos, if you were reading it in English. And these books were fascinating. These ideas that were there,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely fascinating. And many people get involved in New Age through fiction books. For example, the Harry Potter series of
Mm-hmm.
books. The first time ever in the history of planet Earth civilization, J.K. Rowling, an author, a book author, becomes a billionaire through
Mm-hmm.
writing a series of short children's fiction stories. But
Mm-hmm.
those stories are all about witchcraft and Wicca. So kids read this stuff as I read this fiction stuff, and you're fascinated by it. And I felt in my heart there has got to be a real occult, but it took a little while for me to connect with this New Age center in Los Angeles called the Lighted Way, where I actually got deeply involved in occult. But yes, movies out there and TV programs and books and magazines are all over the place, seducing people into this New Age
Mm-hmm.
spirituality, which again is now just spiritual. It's just spirituality, as they call
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, you already answered a little bit my next question, that by getting involved in reading and watching these kind of movies and book, and again, were these movies and books for became real for you since you started to take over your life and had an impact on your life? What that happened?
Well, when I joined this New Age center called the Lighted Way, I mentioned the first 4 years were exciting. A lot of changes in my life. Just practical areas. For example, I was a car hobbyist and I used to love driving old cars and fixing them up. I was a mechanic hobbyist. And I remember one morning I was planning to change some pistons in the car. One of the pistons had broken. It was a pretty new engine. It had been rebuilt, but I could tell it was blowing oil and there was a crack in the piston. So I decided to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And that I had rented a hydraulic engine lifting rig for the garage. We had a large 2-car garage in the house in Hollywood where we lived, and I was going to do all the work in our garage. But then that Saturday morning, first thing, my voice of conscience told me, don't skip meditation. To be a part of the Lighted Way New Age Center, it was mandatory that you had to practice every day
Mm-hmm.
transcendental meditation. And so I was meditating, and this voice immediately spoke to me, the voice of the higher self, as we would sometimes call it, or the voice of God, the voice of the Holy Spirit. You can give it several names, but it was this inner voice of the silence spoke to me, and it said, Will, you're wasting your time fixing up this old car. You need to junk this car. Just buy yourself a new car. It's all time wasting. You need to be spending your time studying the New Age occult books. You need to be involved in service for the New Age Center. Don't waste your time fixing up these old junker banger cars. And it made sense to me. This was an old lifestyle pattern that I had adopted over the years, and it was fun, but it was no longer functional. So I decided to be obedient to that voice, and I uh, basically phoned for the wreckers or the junkyard, the scrapyard, and I bought a new car. My spirit guide told me exactly what model of car to buy, where to buy it, and how much to pay for it. And that car I had, it was a Plymouth. It was a wonderful car. I loved it. So this guidance from the silence within, or the voice of the spirit within, or this, whether it be it your spirit guide, your higher self, the voice of God, the voice of the Holy Spirit, or the voice of Jesus speaking within you. This is talking about the other Jesus, the counterfeit Jesus. Whatever that voice is, was very wise, and it helped me in many practical areas of my life. But I remember then one evening at one of the classes at the New Age Center, our founder and director, Muriel, was teaching the class, and she told us that her own ascended master, which was a different ascended master than I had, he was the master Kutume, that he had told her we had to start a new advertising program in that New Age Center, and that we would need $7,000 to pay for advertisements in the local newspapers to attract new students to the center. We were short of students. And she invited us to send donations. Now, at that time, I had just returned from a 1-year spiritual pilgrimage to the United Kingdom. My spirit guide, Khul, sent me there, and I was basically spent most of the time as a member of the Findhorn Foundation. This is this large New Age commune in northern Scotland. It has been described as the Vatican City of the New Age, and I worked for Findhorn Press, producing many of the New Age books there. For example, books by David Spangler, Reflections on the Christ. This is obviously the Antichrist that Spangler is communicating with. This is my belief, not the real Jesus. And I had then, after a year back in the United Kingdom, my spirit guide one morning, without any warning, told me, Will, you've got to come back to Los Angeles. Go back to Los Angeles. We need you there. So I returned to Los Angeles. So I didn't have much money. Then I got my old job back. I was working as an engineer in the refrigeration and air conditioning equipment business. And I figured I had maybe $500 in my bank account, and I decided to send it. I was impressed to send the $500, and I sent that money. And 2 days later, the spirit guide came back and it said, Will, this is not enough money. You need to now immediately send another check, this time for $1,000. And I responded to the spirit guide. I could hold a two-way communication with the spirit guide, just as you folk can clearly hear my voice. I could hear the voice of the spirit guide speaking to me, and he said, Will, you need to send that money. And I said, I don't have any money. I don't have it. And he said, use your MasterCard. And I was shocked to hear that. What? Use credit cards to fund the New Age movement? I thought the New Age movement was all about prosperity, not getting into debt. And I rebelled against the voice. When I was a teenager, there was a rebellious spirit developed in me, a rebellious nature or character, and I rebelled against the voice. And at work, I remember that morning feeling depressed. And this voice of the spirit guide could speak with me at any time. It didn't have to be in the practice of transcendental meditation. Anytime I could now hear this spirit guide speaking to me when he chose to speak to me through telepathic communication. And he said, Will, you were feeling depressed because you were rebelling against God's will. You need to send that money. Use your credit cards to send that money. And I got more rebellious. And after lunch, I was feeling so depressed that I couldn't stand it anymore. And the spirit guide is saying, Will, you again feeling depressed because you are grieving the Holy Spirit. By your rebellion, by your disobedience, you're grieving the Holy Spirit, and you're now, this depression is the emptiness of life without the Spirit of God inside of you. And you are foolish to live this way. And I reasoned, yeah, this makes sense. So at the end of the workday, I went back to the apartment where I was living, and I wrote out a check and put it in an envelope, knowing that I could then use my MasterCard to draw cash out of an ATM and transfer that into my bank account. So I went to the nearest mailbox as soon as the envelope with that check to the New Age Center, which was it was about 40 miles away from where I was living. As soon as the envelope went into that mailbox, the depression lifted instantly. Instantly it was gone. I just felt fine, just felt normal. I thought, well, the Holy Spirit's back. I've done what I needed to do. Well, 2 days later, the spirit guide came back in my morning meditation, congratulated me on sending that money, but said, it's not enough. You need to now immediately send another check, this time for $2,000. And when I heard that voice for the first time, I did not want to hear the voice of the spirit guide. I did not feel happy at all about this instruction. And I immediately quit that meditation, and in deep sadness and deep fear, drove to my job. When I got to the office, I couldn't do any work at all. This command to send this money was so deeply implanted in me that I just couldn't do any work. I didn't do any work all that day. And about an hour into the morning, the spirit guide returns and starts demanding that I send this money, and telling me in a demanding tone, you agreed to be my disciple. You agreed to be a disciple of the ascended masters. Why are you rebelling? You need to quit this rebellion immediately. And the more this voice spoke, the more rebellious I got. The only problem was I was feeling now very depressed. By lunchtime, I was feeling so depressed that I actually felt nauseous. I was almost vomiting with depression. And by the afternoon, I realized I had two choices. The depression was so bad, I had two choices. Either I commit suicide to put myself out of this misery, or I'm obedient. Well, I didn't commit suicide at the end of the afternoon. I went to my apartment and I got out. Then I actually had got in the mail some of these MasterCard checks with a MasterCard or Visa company sends you checks. I had some of those, and I wrote out a check for $2,000, drove over to the nearest mailbox. As soon as the check was deposited in that mailbox, the depression, the nausea, all lifted from me, and I just felt fine. I had now entered that New Age nightmare where the demonic spirits could manipulate my emotions and force me to do whatever they wanted me to do. I had no choice whatsoever. The depression that they could put me under was so bad. They were beaming depression power or energy upon me, making me feel depressed, making me feel sick. And then for the next 2 years, I lived that kind of New Age nightmare. No more peace, no more prosperity. I think I went down into debt something like $12,000 by the time I was rescued from that New Age 2 years later.
Wow, that's really, it's not just exciting and interesting, but it sounds dangerous as well. And I just want to, a lot of questions popped up my mind while you were explaining this. So just one of those questions. So you mentioned already that your spiritual guide was a voice. You could hear that voice, right, around you as we are talking right now.
Yeah, originally he appeared to me in a vision, an incredible vision, whilst practicing transcendental meditation. When I first saw him, I thought he was Jesus Christ because he looked like Jesus, long white robe, long golden hair resting on his shoulders, and his face radiating brilliant, blinding light. His feet looked like burnished bronze, like glowing metal. Just the way it portrays the
Yeah.
angel of the Lord, the
Okay.
theophanic revelation
Mm.
of God. He looked just the same, but these are demonic spirits. They have the power to appear as angels of light. And
Yeah.
yes, I was totally deceived, and then a slave of demonic spirits.
And I'm sure that this demonic spirit which had appeared to you, you are not the only person. And I hope that a lot of other people that had this experience are going to listen and are going to hear your testimony here tonight. Another question I
Yeah,
have to you, just to emphasize this point, because you already mentioned the name of the spirit, which is Djwal Khul. And
yes.
to my knowledge, this spirit is the same spirit that inspired Madame Blavatsky, which at the later point uh, started the Theosophic Society. We're not going to go into these details. So you already have the book there. So
This is a
you,
book.
you
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you guessed. So this is the same spirit, and to my knowledge, is the same spirit that inspired some of the grounding father of United Nations.
Yes, one of the under secretaries of the United Nations, Robert Mueller, was a follower of Theosophy and its offshoot. The main offshoot was of Theosophy was the Alice Bailey movement. This is one of the Alice Bailey books.
Mm-hmm.
This is titled Esoteric Psychology, Volume 3. It's written by a publisher called Lucis Publishing
Company,
Company.
yeah.
This was renamed after it was originally launched by Alice Bailey. Alice
Mm-hmm.
Bailey was a theosophist. She was originally the wife of an Anglican priest. She was actually from my own city of Manchester in the United Kingdom. She emigrated to the United States, to California, with her Anglican husband. And because their income was not very high, she was helping the family make ends meet by working in a fish cannery. And one of the colleagues there was a theosophist and started interesting Alice
Mm-hmm.
Bailey, the Anglican priest's wife, interesting her in this book, Secret
Mm-hmm.
Doctrine. And it's interesting how Bailey makes this statement in her autobiography. This is Alice Bailey's autobiography, in which she says here, I sat up in bed reading the Secret Doctrine at night and began to neglect reading my Bible. And she
Mm-hmm.
described how she was fascinated by this book, Secret Doctrine. Incidentally, Lucis Publishing Company, when Alice Bailey launched that publishing company, Alice Bailey became a medium or a channeler for the spirit guide, Djwal, one of the
Mm-hmm.
Theosophical Ascended Masters, and
Mm-hmm.
she published in total about 12, 13, 14 books. They're all have this blue jacket on them. And originally, when she set up the publishing company, it was called Lucifer Publishing Company. Now, even though I was a student of all these books, I had no idea that Lucis Publishing Company for 2 years, when it was first launched, was called Lucifer Publishing Company. As a New Ager, when I learned that subsequently, I was shocked. I was very shocked. But I was already a slave of demonic spirits. And the New Age doesn't believe Lucifer or Satan exists anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yes,
Well,
this is a very, very deceptive movement.
well, this is a subject that is totally offside, and I know people like Professor Walter Foyt. He's been digging a lot into this subject, especially around the Theosophic Society, Madame Blavatsky, and who actually this spirit guide is and where it's coming from. But let's go back to your testimony here, because I just want to ask you. My next question is that I'm sure that almost everybody in U.S. knows Oprah Winfrey, and a lot of people here in Europe as well. And this is not meant as an attack on Oprah Winfrey, but about her beliefs in New Age as an example, which she has been promoting very openly for years and have impacted thousands of people, maybe millions. As someone plugged out miraculously from the New Age, I can only hope, as you are, that Christians who love and trust Oprah will not blur the lines of their faith. Oprah has stated that though she was raised as a Baptist, she no longer believes that Jesus is the only way to reach God. So now it sounds so much more rational and compassionate and inclusive, doesn't it?
Yes, it is. The New Age presents its message in a very attractive manner, just like Adam and Eve, when they looked at that fruit on the tree, it looked good for food and it looked good for gaining wisdom, and so why not eat it? Yes, a lot of the New Age teachings are very, very attractive. Who doesn't want to have peace and harmony between religious movements after years of strife? You think of like the Crusades and the Inquisition. Who wants to have that kind of thing going on? Isn't it better that we all just get along, that we acknowledge we're all part of the path leading to heaven? The only problem is Satan and his evil angels are real. New Age denies a flagrant pillar of New Age doctrine is that Satan doesn't exist. But the reality is Satan exists. The New Age movement is his initiative that he has launched to deceive the whole world. Satan wants to take control over the whole world, and he will. He is going to take control over the world. Only those that do not have the mark of the beast, I beg your pardon, only those that are not going to have the seal of the living God. Everyone else is going to end up with the mark of the beast. So he is going to take control over the secular world. He's going to take control over the religious world. And yeah, it is very, very tragic that TV and movie personalities like Oprah are promoting New Age people. She promotes Marianne Williamson and other New Age leaders and their teachings. It is tragedy, and many people are getting sucked into the New Age. They're getting seduced by a lot of the Hollywood media people that promote it.
But as you just mentioned, everybody, almost everybody today around the world is looking for world peace. Isn't that what United Nations, the Pope of Rome, all of these institutions, they want to unite all religions, and it seems that this is the way, this is maybe the only way to achieve everlasting peace. So again, why would you say, why can't we just all just get along and just join the New Age movement, the New Spirituality movement?
You know, what you're saying reminds me of an airline flight I took. I was after I was rescued from New Age and my book was a best-selling book. I was invited to a lot of camp meetings, and I remember at the Los Angeles airport catching a plane back east to speak at a camp meeting. And at that time, you had the Hare Krishna people that were able to offer books and pamphlets and flyers and stuff free at airports. They would often be on the concourse. And I saw a Hare Krishna person there, and they had a pile of books and stuff. And I walked up to the person. I thought maybe I could witness to this person. And I remember she was holding a book, and I had a little conversation with her. And as I looked at her hands, I noticed where her fingernails were. All the fingernails and the skin around her fingernails had been gnawed away. They were actually bleeding. I mean, the blood wasn't bleeding, dripping from them, but I could see that through incredible nervous tension, this woman was biting away at the skin around her fingernails. And you know, I found this so tragic, so sad. The reason was my hands looked just like that. So yes, the New Age promises peace. The reality is you stay in it long enough and you become demonized, you end up a nightmare, anguish and slavery to demonic spirits, just like that Hare Krishna follower. Now, I'm not saying all Hare Krishna followers or all followers of the New Age are nervous wrecks, but a point eventually is reached where you're going to be demonized. And this New Age movement is going to take control over the world, and it is going to be a nightmare for Christians. The problem with the New Age belief, it is not biblical. Jesus didn't say all paths lead to God. He said there is only one path that leads to God, and that is through him, through Jesus. He said narrow is the way that leads to eternal life. New Age says broad is the path, and there are many paths that lead to eternal life and to paradise. It's just not compatible with biblical teaching. And we're going to head to some very troublesome times. And if people get seduced into this thing on their personal level, it is not going to bring them the peace in the long term that they're looking for. It's not going to bring them solutions to their problems. It isn't. It's going to make them worse.
Well, there are a lot of questions we don't have, and I'm sure you don't have the answer to in regards to New Age, and there are questions that are not seeking an answer, but rather opening a door leading to a wider path. Now, question like the one posed shortly after creation, hasn't God said that he could eat of every tree of the garden? So my question to you, is that what New Age is offering? Every religious path would lead to God?
That's exactly what it is offering. Yes, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or whether you're a Wiccan, a follower of neo-pagan witchcraft, which is what the Harry Potter books are promoting. It doesn't matter if you're a theosophist. It doesn't matter if you're a fundamentalist Christian. All paths lead to God, but it is a terrible, terrible deception. It sounds good, but if you study the Bible, you know that this has all been prophesied. Jesus prophesied. He said, watch out that no one deceives you in Matthew 24. And Jesus tells us there, he says, so if at that time, the last days, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, there is the Messiah, there is the Christ, or here he is, Jesus said, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear. And then I love this verse here, verse 26 of Matthew 24. So if someone tells you, there he is out in the desert, the Sahara Desert, Mojave Desert, Arabian Desert, wherever, do not go out. Or here he is in the inner rooms or the inner chambers, do not believe it. See, the New Age promotes the idea that Christ is within, that you are actually Christ. They teach there is a true Christ that's going to come in a second coming, and that is going to be the Antichrist. But they also teach that if you want to have a relationship with Jesus, or if you want to connect with Christ, practice transcendental meditation. Christ is in the inner rooms or the inner chambers. All you need to do is access him, and that's where you will have fellowship and communion with Jesus. This is a lie. This transcendental meditation has never been a part of the old covenant people of God, the Israelites. They never practiced any of this transcendental meditation in order to hear God's voice. God's system of communicating to man is through prophets. God selects the prophet. A prophet doesn't go out there and practice transcendental meditation in order to get a vision or a dream from God or to have God speak to him. No. God approaches someone he selects as a prophet. He gives them dreams or visions or speaks with them directly as he did with Moses. And this is how God brings a knowledge of religion, a knowledge of salvation, a knowledge of himself to mankind. New Age says, no, you practice transcendental meditation, which is from the Eastern pagan religion. This comes from Hinduism. These are pagan gods, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, Kurgi, Dalit, Ganesha. These are pagan, multiple pagan deities. This is where this transcendental meditation comes from. And God is not going to reveal himself through pagan, mystical, transcendental practices. It's just not, God just is not going to communicate that way.
Now, in our next interview tomorrow, we're going to discuss some of the best-selling books that are out there, the ones that you already mentioned, dangerous books that are lulling people into a belief that New Age will bring them into a state of better understanding and a closer communion with God. As I understand, the New Age movement is based on concepts that sounds almost irresistible. Like if some hear the spills of modern gurus, like you already mentioned, Tolle, Williamson, and begin to think that faith of the Protestant fathers is too rigid, too narrow, that God would never impose an irrational boundary between us and full knowledge of the spiritual real. Now, is it also your experience that the New Age movement is gaining ground where Christianity is losing?
Absolutely, absolutely. You folk in Europe, of course, are well aware that Christianity has been in steep decline for a long number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Probably started with Charles Darwin and his book, The Origin of Species, that
Yeah, yes.
created doubt about God's creation of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, especially in the 1950s, when the BBC started public broadcasting, and people then became addicted to TV basically instead of going to church. And you had this gradual decline of Christianity, and in its place, you have the New Age movement becoming popular. But let me say, Christianity is not in decline, it's just growing now in the third world countries or the
Mm-hmm.
developing countries. Christianity is growing like wildfire in Africa, even in some of the areas of communism like Russia and China. You've got a tremendous increase in Christianity. South America is still very, very strongly Christian. There's a tremendous evangelical growth in Christianity there in South and Central America. It seems like that God is not putting the same resources into Europe and the United States as in the past. And yes, New Age is becoming very popular, but not visibly or blatantly so. New
Mm-hmm.
Age is fitness centers where they're practicing yoga. New Age is medical establishments where they're giving these alternative healing therapies. New Age is in the education system where they're promoting mindfulness meditation. You don't have to just go to an occult New Age center to have New Age practice. New Age is very much a home religion. People practice transcendental meditation in their own homes. They
Mm-hmm.
practice yoga in their own homes. So it's very true, yes. In the States, in the most developed countries, we are seeing this decline in Christianity and New Age is taking over. It's very tragic, but you know, God prophesied it. It's
Mm-hmm.
all prophesied in the Bible. Jesus said that the faith of many will grow cold.
Mm. All right. Well, you already mentioned slightly before that New Age as a whole does not believe in Satan or the devil. But what about evil? Does New Agers believe in evil? Is there such a thing
Oh,
as evil?
absolutely, it
Mm.
does. Yes, yes, it very much believes in evil. Let me quote from one of the channeled books from Alice Bailey, Djwal, Khul, the spirit guide channeled this in esoteric psychology. It says this: what do we mean by the phrase forces of evil?
Mm.
Not the armies of unrighteousness and sinfulness organized under that figment of the imagination, the devil, or some supreme antichrist. For
Mm-hmm.
such an army does not exist,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no great enemy of God around in battle against the Most High. There is only suffering, erring humanity, still half awakened, dimly sensing the vision and struggling to free itself from the thraldom of the past.
Mm-hmm.
See, New Age absolutely teaches us evil, but New Age teaches that evil is just the inherent human condition caused
Mm-hmm.
by ignorance. And the way to overcome evil is through education, spiritual education, to study these books and all the other New Age books that are out there, and to be educated at the foot of the master, the ascended master, or your personal spirit guide, or your personal angel, through the practice of transcendental meditation. So yeah, New Age believes that evil exists. I mean, you know, New Agers aren't stupid, basically. I mean, they're foolish, but they're not that ignorant. We all know about Hitler and the Holocaust. We all know about Stalin and the purges, Pol Pot, and the terrible tragedies in Cambodia. We all know about the Inquisition. So New Age is very clear that there is evil, but you overcome evil through education in true spirituality, as they would claim it to be, which is Eastern mysticism and the path of meditation. But New Age does not believe in the existence of Satan.
Yeah, and I find it that very interesting that you were actually just reading from Madame Blavatsky book, which she was inspired by the spiritual guide, which is called Djwal Khul, which we believe it's actually probably Satan. And it's very interesting that he was inspiring her to write that he doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, this book actually is Alice Bailey. We did look earlier at Blavatsky's book. And Alice Bailey and Blavatsky, they teach very similar things. Blavatsky came first, and Alice Bailey was a student of theosophy.
Well, then how does New Ager accept man's problem as a separation by sin from God?
Now, there is no concept of sin in New Age theology at all. It is completely absent. There is no concept of it. There is a concept of right and wrong, but it is never communicated in terms of sin. There are good actions and right actions. This comes from Hinduism, or good and bad actions. But the concept of sin and forgiveness of sin is totally absent from New Age theology. It just doesn't. It's just not part of their teaching at all.
All right. So how is that? You already mentioned that the solution to evil is through education. But how far did New Age actually, how much did they achieve? Because there are a lot of people out there practicing all these different New Age philosophies, all these different New Age ideologies, in all these different New Age groups. How much did they achieve?
Well, you have to realize that Satan and his evil angels have multiple strategies for taking control over society. So whilst Satan reaches out to spiritually inclined people through New Age spirituality, you have to realize that Satan is also inspiring atheists to be diehard atheists. He's inspiring radical Muslims to be absolute radical terrorists. So Satan plays one group against another. It's a common strategy of divide and conquer. So the New Age is never gonna overcome evil. In reality, I think Satan's most successful initiative has been evolution and secularism. His main agent on planet Earth was Charles Darwin. That destroyed a lot of people's faith, that theory of evolution and the secularism that has evolved from it. So Satan has many strategies, and the New Age tries to solve the problems that Satan himself is creating through wars and through tensions. He's got this New Age spiritual movement to try to solve the problems that he himself creates. Satan doesn't care whether you're an atheist or whether you're a spiritual person, as long as you're under his control, as long as you're not a dedicated disciple of the real Jesus Christ, as long as you are not a follower of the teachings of the Bible, as long as you're not a genuine, true Christian, as long as you're not an evangelical Christian, Satan is going to be happy. He doesn't care what you are.
Okay. Well, as far as I understand New Age practices, it makes one thing clear for me, New Agers are universalists, so are a lot of Christians, believing that all path leads to God. We have the one world religion already existing today. Is that correct? Is that a correct understanding? Can Eastern practices, which you've already mentioned so far, be blended into Christianity to produce something better?
If you are a student of the Bible, especially of the Old Testament, you will read all the accounts of how Israel, the nation of Israel, constantly were succumbing to the temptation of pagan religion from the surrounding nations. Even the great King Solomon was seduced into pagan religious practice to make offerings on pagan altars. That's how bad the human condition is of depravity and degeneracy. Why Solomon, probably the wisest person that ever lived, still got seduced because of his weakness for women, pagan women, that influenced him. So when you look at the history of Israel, throughout the whole Old Testament, God's constant focus is do not go after pagan gods. Do not go after these deities like Baal or Chemosh, Astara. I mean, they've got several different Canaanite names. Those pagan religions of the Middle East don't exist anymore. In their place, you've got Hinduism, Buddhism, you've got Jainism, different Eastern religions that are basically offshoots of Hinduism. I remember the famous Christian author Dave Hunt. He says there's really only two religions on planet Earth. There's the Judeo-Christian religion of God, and then you've got Hinduism. And all these other religions from the East are offshoots of Hinduism. And Islam is, in a sense, an offshoot of the Judeo-Christian religion. The Quran itself is actually very, very compatible with what the Bible teaches. I wish that Muslims would be obedient to exactly what the Quran teaches. They would actually have a lifestyle and a belief system very similar to Christians. But yes, the New Age promises that all religions are from God, but that's not what the Bible teaches. Clearly, New Age is based on pagan religion foundations. Theosophy is based on the Hindu religion. The whole development of theosophy started when Madame Blavatsky made visits to India and to Tibet and met with the lamas there of lamaseries and the abbots of these different Hindu centers and the priests, and educated herself in Hinduism. And she was a medium, she was a spiritist, she channeled spirit guides, and they claimed to be of God, these ascended masters, and they motivated Madame Blavatsky to then start a new religion which endeavored to synthesize the East and the West, to synthesize Christianity together with the Eastern religions and together with traditional Western occultism, things like astrology, numerology, and the witchcraft religions. They were all merged together to produce this new spiritual movement.
So this sounds like a really smart, really genius strategy from Satan. And the Bible has a very clear answer to exactly this question. And the answer is no. New Age does not bring anything good into Christianity. Now, what happened in your life during this time as a New Age priest? What did actually brought you out of New Age and back to the real Jesus?
Well, I was deeply involved in the New Age for about 6 to 7 years. This is when I was practicing channeling, and the first 4 years or so, my spirit guide was Djwal, the demonic spirit that communicated the materials to Alice Bailey to produce her books. And then in 85, a new spirit guide took control over my life, and he claimed to be Jesus Christ. And our New Age center became a counterfeit Christian church. We were calling ourselves Christians. We were calling ourselves born-again Christians. I was even baptized by immersion baptism. And I believed I was a Christian. And this new spirit guide claiming to be Jesus basically forced me, I think would be the right word, forced me to start a beach ministry in Venice Beach. In Los Angeles, you've got several beaches, and one of the most popular ones is Venice Beach. It's got a boardwalk there, and I was told to start a beach ministry there. I had a stand, and I used to hand out, there was a very provocative picture of Jesus there, and it attracted a lot of attention, and I had handouts promoting Christian meditation. And as I was involved in this beach ministry, I was involved in it for about 6 months before I was rescued from this deception. As I was involved in the beach ministry, I realized that whenever I would be talking to Christians, I realized I didn't know the Bible, and I could not intelligently discuss Bible teachings with them. And so I figured if I studied Christianity, if I learned what the different denominations believe, for example, if I knew what Methodists believed, or Anglicans, or Presbyterians, or Pentecostals believed, if I knew what the Catholic Church believed, then I would be a more effective witness for the type of Christianity that I was promoting, which was basically New Age Christianity, but I was not calling it New Age Christianity. We could call it contemplative Christianity or mystical Christianity. That's what I was promoting. And so I started studying Christianity in the city library where I was living, the city of Torrance, which is a suburb, if you will, of Los Angeles. They had a book there, Encyclopedia of American Religion. And I started studying all about Christianity. And I eventually came to a chapter on the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as I was reading that chapter, I was fascinated by the account of Ellen White, that apparently Seventh-day Adventists had this prophet called Ellen White that supposedly had mystical visions and dreams from God. And I was, as a New Ager, I thought, wow, this is a Christian lady having visions and dreams. She must have been a New Ager, but obviously she was not on the path of development spiritually very far to still be what you call a fundamentalist Christian. But I was inspired to find some of her books and try to find out what did she believe. And eventually I visited a local Adventist church and borrowed some books from the pastor on Ellen White. And there was one particular book. It's a book about Ellen White. It was a biography of her written by a Dutchman called René Nurbergen. It was titled Ellen White, Prophet of Destiny. And I started to read this book on the life of Ellen White. I found it fascinating, and I got to chapter 5 that was titled Unmasking the Mastermind. And it was a narrative primarily of Ellen White's great controversy vision. And I'm reading this account where Ellen White describes exactly what Satan looks like physically, in his physical form. That he is a kingly angel, but now his form is aging and his flesh is starting to droop. And she described how he had a sickly grin on his face. And as I read that description of what Satan looks like, and Ellen White describes that sickly grin as being, he is plotting his great deception for the last days, and he's got this grin on his face because he's visualizing he's just deceived another person through this deception of spiritualism. And as I read that, I had what you could call a true enlightenment. You know, the New Agers talk about having enlightenment. That comes from the Hindu and Buddhist religions, that you're the enlightened one, or you have enlightenment. And I had a true enlightenment. In an instant, I knew that my personal spirit guides, both Djwal, Khul, and this new spirit guide who claimed to be Jesus, I knew that they were Satan's angels masquerading as an angel of light. And I just knew that the whole New Age movement was Satan's counterfeit spirituality, designed to take control over the world, so Satan would be in control of the world, and designed to prepare the way so that when Satan comes as the Antichrist, whether he or somebody else in human form or whatever, when the Antichrist comes, the whole world will believe that this is the second coming of Jesus. I mean, I knew that in an instant, and I was out.
Wow.
That was it. That was the end of the New Age. No more transcendental meditation, no more studying these New Age occult books, no more Madame Blavatsky, no more Alice Bailey, no more meditation practice, no more practice of yoga, no more occult practice, no more tarot card readings, no more numerology, just the Word of God.
Yeah, wow.
This was the rule of my faith.
Well, that was very inspiring to listen to your actual conversion, and I hope this is going to be inspiring for everybody watching this presentation. Now, also tomorrow, we are also going to discuss the New Age inroads into the Christianity and especially the Seventh-day Church as well. But just to touch base with you on the subject tomorrow and underline that this is not something we're guessing based on a personal opinion. The New Age movement had a facelift and some plastic surgery to be more acceptable for Christianity. Because isn't Christianity, especially Seventh-day Adventists, the end target for this massive deception, or one of the end targets?
Yeah, absolutely. All fundamentalist, Bible-believing churches are a main target for this New Age infiltration, and I became a Seventh-day Adventist, and it has been shocking for me to discover how New Age has infiltrated the Adventist church. It's not in a big way, but it has infiltrated in some very serious manners. Yes, absolutely. And when you are dedicated to scriptural truth, you are going to be a target of Satan's attack. If you are a Bible-believing Christian, you're the subject of those fiery darts. That's why often Christians face problems in their lives, because Satan is having you as a main target.
Yeah. Well, as a last question here tonight, allow me to point to a study that found that witches now, it seems that outnumbers, for example, Presbyterian Christians in the United States by 100,000, with 1.5 million self-identified witches, as paganism continues to grow astronomically. The study here shows that 25% of Americans identify as spiritual but not religious, including 35% of Christian. And this is one of the fastest growing spiritual religious demography in the West right now. This study, which I've just pointed out, shows that the population of those who identify as witches or pagans is continuing to increase, as those who identify as Protestant Christian continues to decrease. Well, we don't have time tonight here to go through this study, but the link it's here on this slide at the bottom. If anyone would go and look at this website, christianpost.com, and just search witches outnumber Presbyterians, you will find this this study that what I'm talking about. Now, are we seeing the results of this intense, massive, and aggressive New Age campaign succeeding here?
Absolutely. May I just mention that Wicca or witchcraft is very much part of New Age. It's not mainstream, it's on the fringes of New Age, but it's very, very powerful connection to theosophy and conventional New Age. Gerald Gardner, the person that reintroduced witchcraft into our modern culture, he was a theosophist. He was a follower of the Theosophical Society, and he packaged witchcraft to reflect a lot of the theosophical teachings. It is different. Wiccans are not mainstream New Ages, but it is very much part of this deception of spiritualism for the last days.
So this is just a side plan from the genius mastermind to attack Christianity and the world as a whole. Well, my next slide here, it's actually showing a new study released on October 1st of 2017 by Pew Research, and reveal something very shocking, I would say. They surveyed Americans to see what they thought about the following 4 New Age beliefs. So number 1 is spiritual energy exists in physical things. Number 2 is that physics have reliable insight into the future. Number 3, it's about reincarnation. Number 4, it's about astrology. And as you can see here on the screen, not only did 62% of the general public hold at least one of these beliefs, you have 61% of the professing Christian held one of these new age beliefs. So that means that almost 1/3 of the professing Church of Christ believe that they will live again in another body, in another life on this planet, even though the Bible says in Hebrew 9:27 that it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. That means no life after death, thus reincarnation contradicts the entire gospel. We will stand before the judgment seat as Christ. The study shows also that 4 in 10 professing Christians believe in psychics as a viable means of foretelling the future, even though the Bible repeating condemns this practice, as we read here in Deuteronomy 18:10 to 12 here. And I'm not going to read the Bible verse here. It's up here on the screen, and I would strongly recommend anyone to look this up. Now, my question to you here, the last question to you, based on this study alone, it looks like God is losing and Satan is winning.
It looks that way. We don't know how things are going to end up. When you study the book of Revelation, it looks like things are not going to be good for those that are faithful to Jesus. But Jesus tells us we have to hold on to our faith. In many ways, the New Age does present a lot of attractive ideas. But, the Word of God tells us that there is a path that looks good, that appears to be good, but the way thereof is the way of evil, the way of darkness. It is not good. I tell you, I'm so glad I'm out of that New Age. I mean, it was an absolute nightmare when you get very, very deeply. Most New Agers are not in it that deeply, but I'm so glad I'm out of it. And I'm so glad that I'm a Christian, that I'm not living the secular life. I migrated over to New Age because the secular life was basically empty. You can only enjoy parties for so long. It was fun living in Hollywood for a year or so, but sooner or later get bored with the parties, you get tired of that, you want something deeper for the soul. The party lifestyle does not supply the needs of the soul within us. Jesus Christ fulfills that need. And it's tragic that most Christians are probably not disciples of Jesus. They just profess to be Christians. They're church members. They've got their membership somewhere on the records of some denomination. But are they really disciples of Jesus? Is Jesus the Lord and Master of their lives? If they were disciples of Jesus, they're not going to be involved in this occult Eastern mysticism type of practice.
Yeah. Well, we've been covering just some of the aspects about New Age, and it looks like the threat is this new wave of spiritual philosophy that draws from whatever religious tradition and practice it wants, while promising its followers supernatural experiences and some ascension into some hyper-spiritual state where they can attain paranormal powers and rise up the ranks of the so-called godhood. Well, is the threat that those teaching has clearly showed that we can follow any path we want because God has revealed himself in all world religions and is present in the universe as the energy of life?
You know, as I mentioned in Proverbs, God tells us, there is a path that seems right to a man, but the way of it is the way of death. It's eternal damnation is the way of that path. We need to be focused on the Bible. You see, the problem was I didn't, even though I was brought up in a conservative Christian home environment, I never studied the Bible. I never did. There are many Christians that even go to church every Sunday or go to church if the Sabbatarians on the Sabbath, and they still don't study their Bible. They just accept what the pastor tells them. We need to be studying God's Word. We need to study the Bible. If you study the Bible and you know what it teaches, you're not going to be deceived. You cannot be deceived.
All right. Well, Will Barron, thank you very much for being part of tonight's program and taking time for this very important topic. Even if your book is over 20 years now, I believe that it's still important, probably more important today than it was back then when you wrote the book. Because I strongly believe that evil spirits and their deception are very, very real, and we are being targeted every day, even more today, through media, books, and movies. And especially Christians are being targeted, and also everybody is being targeted. Stay tuned, come back tomorrow, same time, when we're going to discuss about the dangers of different aspects with the New Age movement. Because popular teachers like already mentioned, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart, Tolle, Rick Warren, Leonard Sweet, Alice Bailey, Brooke Boon, Thomas Merton, J.K. Rowling, Jon Dybdal, Helen Blavatsky, and any others continue to sell millions of copies of their books teaching the idea that God is an impersonal force in the universe and that we are to cultivate relationship with this force by shifting our consciousness and practicing things like mindfulness, presence, or yoga, or spiritual formation, Tai Chi, and others. Thank you, Will, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you. We were teaching that Jesus is going to come in a second coming. He is going to come soon. And we're preparing for that second coming of Jesus. And we were teaching that we should not look up into the clouds of the sky for Jesus to come, because he is not going to come that way. We were followers of the other Jesus. We were completely deceived. We were actually working for the Antichrist.